He walked through the glass tower with his head bowed low, a man invisible in a world that worshipped brilliance. But that day, the man no one saw was about to do the impossible. Halcyon Tower rose over the city like a verdict carved in glass. 42 floors of mirrored ambition, where light refracted through every corner and no shadow was allowed to rest too long. The building itself seemed alive. Air-conditioned veins humming softly, screens glowing like organs of a mechanical god. It was where the world's cures were created and its consciences quietly sold. And in that place of immaculate precision, Daniel Harper pushed his janitor's cart. He moved the way people do when they've learned that silence is safer than conversation. His gray uniform hung a little loose around the shoulders. His boots made no sound on the polished marble, as if even the ground refused to notice him. The smell of disinfectant clung to his hands, faint, clean, and mercifully neutral. No one greeted him. Not the receptionists tapping on tablets, not the executives passing with faces fixed like porcelain masks, not the engineers discussing billion-dollar projects that would outlive them all. He didn't mind. Invisibility had become his sanctuary. Daniel had once been something else, a teacher with hands gentle enough to calm a room of restless children. He used to read stories about stars and rivers and the kindness of small creatures who helped each other find their way home. But that was another lifetime, before the night the world folded in on itself. He didn't let himself remember that night often. When he did, it came back in fragments. Headlights cutting through rain, a child's laughter, a scream swallowed by metal and glass. Then the silence, the kind that never leaves. Now he cleaned the places where others made noise. Every evening, as the office lights dimmed, Daniel walked through the corridors like a ghost paid by the hour. He wiped fingerprints off doors that cost more than his yearly salary. He emptied trash bins full of half-eaten lunches and rejected ideas. And when the floor was spotless, he'd pause for a moment, watching the lights of the city blur through the glass. He sometimes imagined his son, Ethan, somewhere in that glow. Maybe not gone, just diffused. That night, on the 30th floor, he heard it again, a sound that didn't belong to the world of glass and ambition. A soft, stifled cry. He froze. The mop handle slipped slightly in his hand. For a moment, he thought it was a dream, grief playing another cruel trick. But then it came again, from behind one of the marble pillars near the conference wing. A child's sob. Daniel set the mop down and walked closer, quiet as he could. Behind the pillar, in the shadow between two walls of glass, sat a little girl, knees drawn to her chest, face buried in her arms. Her dress was too fine for the place she'd chosen to hide in, the silk crumpled like fallen wings. He recognized her immediately. Lila Monroe, daughter of Catherine Monroe, the CEO of Halcyon Biotech. Everyone knew about her. Everyone had heard the whispers. The billionaire's child who hadn't spoken in 3 months. The girl who screamed in her sleep. The reason every psychologist, therapist, and caretaker left the building in tears. But here she was, small, trembling, human. Daniel stood a few feet away, unsure. He had cleaned up enough boardrooms to know that certain people in this building didn't want to be seen, even in their pain. So he didn't speak. He simply sat down beside her. The marble floor was cold through his uniform, but he didn't move. He waited, letting the silence breathe between them. He didn't look at her directly, just enough to see her fingers twitch against her sleeve, the kind of restless motion that said she was still trying to hold the world together. From his cart, he pulled out something wrapped in a small plastic bag. It was a teddy bear, clumsy, uneven, one ear slightly larger than the other. The fur was patched from old fabric, its eyes 2 mismatched buttons, a homemade thing. The kind of toy only love, not skill, could make. He had sewn it last night. Another in the long line of bears he made from Ethan's old shirts. Daniel placed it gently beside her without a word. Lila lifted her head. Her eyes were red, lashes wet, the fragile kind of sadness that makes even time hesitate. She stared at the bear, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, she reached for it. Her fingers brushed the frayed stitching on its arm. Something flickered in her eyes. Confusion first, then curiosity, and finally, something that looked almost like peace. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't need to. She just pressed the bear against her chest and exhaled, a long, trembling breath that sounded like surrender. Daniel stayed there until her sobs faded into quiet hiccups. He didn't try to comfort her. He knew better than to intrude on someone else's silence. He simply existed beside her. That, he had learned, was sometimes enough. After a while, she leaned against the pillar, her breathing soft and steady. The city lights from the glass wall spilled over her like a soft promise. Daniel stood up quietly. He adjusted the bear so it wouldn't fall from her hands. Then he picked up his mop and walked away, his reflection gliding over the polished floor like a secret the building would never tell. Upstairs, unseen cameras watched everything. In an office lined with steel and silence, a woman stared at the monitor. Catherine Monroe, hair pinned in perfect control, eyes hollowed by months of helplessness. She watched her daughter stop crying for the first time in 92 days. And she watched the janitor walk away without looking back. For a long time, she couldn't move. When she finally did, it wasn't to call security, or to issue orders, or to ask for explanations. She just whispered something into the emptiness of her office. Something she hadn't said since the funeral. "Thank you." Down below, Daniel disappeared into the shadowed hallways, pushing his cart toward the next floor. He didn't know that someone had been watching. He didn't know that his small act, quiet, ordinary, human, had just altered the orbit of 3 lives. He only knew the faint sound of peace, a child's breathing, steady now, and for the first time in years, it felt like a prayer answered, and somewhere above him, a mother began to cry for reasons she couldn't name. Catherine Monroe had built her empire on control. Control of numbers, control of markets, control of people. At Stanford, algorithms obeyed her. In boardrooms, billionaires deferred to her. She had that cold precision gifted only to those who understood one simple truth: the world rewards those who never tremble. But no one had ever told her that the hardest thing to command was a child who no longer spoke. Her office on the 42nd floor of Halcyon Biotech was not designed for warmth. It was an altar to discipline. Walls of glass, light that never softened, furniture that looked as if even gravity respected it. From here, she could see the entire skyline: investors, partnerships, acquisitions, everything under her control. Except one small girl. That afternoon, Catherine didn't look at the skyline. She was staring at a security feed. On the screen, a janitor kneeling beside her daughter. No sound, no speech, no touch. He simply sat down, placed a small handmade teddy bear beside the trembling child, and waited. Slowly, impossibly, Lila Monroe stopped crying. Catherine pressed replay, then again, then slower. It didn't make sense. Every expert she'd hired had tried to fix Lila, with methods, procedures, theories. But this man, this ghost in a gray uniform, had done something none of them could do. He had been there. "Who is he?" she asked without looking away. Her assistant, Miranda Cho, hesitated before answering. Daniel Harper, night shift. Contracted from a cleaning service. No disciplinary notes. Background check clear. 6 months here. Education? High school, though. Miranda paused, reading the tablet. He used to be a preschool teacher in Ohio. There was an accident. Accident? Catherine's tone sharpened, the way a scalpel does before it cuts. Car crash. He lost his son. Catherine said nothing. Lost. Such an inadequate word for what it meant to have your soul torn in half. People used it for car keys, for emails, for luggage, not for human beings, not for what she herself had endured. 3 years ago, her husband, Michael Monroe, had died when a corporate jet went down over the Atlantic. Mechanical failure, maintenance delay, human error. Whatever term the report had used didn't matter. The screen in her living room had shown a red ticker. No survivors. That night, she had stood before the window with 4-year-old Lila in her arms, pointing at the horizon. Daddy won't be coming home, she'd said in the same calm voice she used at board meetings. As if death could be reasoned with, as if grief followed a calendar. It didn't. For the next year, Catherine functioned like a survivor dragged from a wreck, breathing, walking, working, but still underwater. She had bought 2 companies, launched a gene therapy division, raised the stock price 38%. The media called her the Iron Widow. Then, 3 months ago, Lila had seen a helicopter during a park visit. She'd looked up, gone silent, then screamed. Hours of panic attacks followed, vomiting, tremors, and finally, silence. Selective mutism, they called it. Trauma that shut the body's voice. Catherine hired 8 nannies, 9 therapists, specialists from Boston, from Zurich. They spoke of art therapy, music therapy, sensory integration. She turned her guest room into a mirrored observation lab. She even hired a violinist to play her husband's favorite concerto. Nothing. When she asked the lead therapist how long recovery would take, he said, "You can't rush healing." "Then find someone who can," she replied. But there was no one, until now. She stared at the paused frame of Daniel's hand placing the teddy bear beside her child. The bear wasn't from a luxury brand. Its stitches were uneven, its fur mismatched, its eyes 2 different buttons. It looked homemade. "Why would he have that?" Catherine asked. Miranda replied quietly. "According to HR, he sometimes sews small toys for the night cleaner's kids. Says it helps him sleep." Catherine's breath faltered. There was something terribly familiar about that kind of tenderness, the kind born from loss. She zoomed in on the man's face, the calmness there wasn't indifference, it was understanding. He knows grief, she thought. That's why she trusts him. For the first time in months, the muscles of her face softened. She leaned back, listening to the hum of the city below, that indifferent heartbeat she had always controlled. Somewhere deep inside, something began to crack. It wasn't weakness. It was recognition. She remembered the day Lila had screamed for her father. "I want Daddy," while Catherine knelt saying, "Mommy's here." But Lila hadn't looked at her. She'd stared right through her, eyes full of betrayal the child herself couldn't name. Catherine could replace a CFO in 3 days, an R&D head in a week, a supplier in an hour, but not a father. And now, a stranger had done what she, the Iron Widow, could not. She covered her mouth with her hand, surprised to find tears on her palm. They weren't theatrical. They were small, involuntary, real. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Get me his full file," background, employment history, personal references, any prior complaints, especially involving children. She was still a CEO, still a mother. The two instincts warred inside her. Protect her daughter, protect her company. Miranda nodded. Right away. Catherine returned her gaze to the screen. For 3 months, she'd watched a child drown inside silence, and now the first breath had come not from therapy, but from presence. She whispered to herself, "Why him?" The city below didn't answer. Her intercom blinked. "Security here, ma'am." "From now on," Catherine said, "I want a live feed of the 30th floor every evening from 5 to 8. Send it directly to my office." "Yes, ma'am." She ended the call. The clock read 5:47 p.m. "She'll go back," Catherine murmured. "Children always return to where they felt safe." And she was right. The next evening, as the last rays of sunset slid across the glass, Lila Monroe appeared again, clutching the crooked teddy bear like a relic. The nanny tried to lead her away, but the child refused. She turned, walked down the hall, and sat by the same pillar as before. On the screen, Catherine watched the janitor notice her. He didn't smile, didn't reach out. He simply set his mop aside and sat down beside her. The same distance, the same patience, the same quiet. Catherine's chest tightened. For the first time, she realized that her daughter didn't need someone to talk her out of her pain. She needed someone willing to sit inside it, someone who wouldn't leave, someone who understood. Someone like Daniel Harper. And as the screen glowed in the dark office, Catherine Monroe, the woman who could save everyone but her child, knew what she had to do. She would have to leave the 42nd floor, even if it meant the world would talk, even if it meant lowering the armor she'd worn for years, even if it meant facing the one thing she'd avoided since the crash: compassion. She had to meet the man who stayed. There are silences in this world that don't ask to be broken. They just need to be heard. Daniel Harper lived inside one of those silences. It followed him everywhere. Through the corridors of Halcyon Tower, through the clatter of mops and buckets, through the late-night hum of the city. It had a weight, a temperature, a pulse. Sometimes it felt like breathing through glass. Everything visible, nothing reachable. Before the accident, he used to believe life had rhythm, that small routines stitched meaning into chaos. Morning pancakes with his son Ethan, singing while brushing teeth, a kiss at the door before work. "See you at 3, champ." That rhythm had been perfect, until the sound of metal shattered it forever. Ohio, 4 years earlier. The sky was gray the day the world ended, the color of hesitation. Daniel remembered thinking it might rain. Maybe he should drive slower. Maybe they'd stop for hot chocolate after picking Sarah up from her shift at the diner. Ethan had been in the back seat, humming a song about astronauts. Daniel remembered glancing at him in the rearview mirror, 5 years old, cheeks flushed with imagination, holding a crayon-drawn picture of a rocket labeled Ethan's ship. Then headlights, then steel, then silence. When he woke up, the world was unrecognizable. A sterile white ceiling, a smell of antiseptic, a doctor's mouth moving but his voice coming from underwater. The words took hours to reach Daniel. "Your son didn't make it." The human mind has a cruel reflex. It searches for bargains with the impossible. He remembered whispering, "You're wrong. He's just hurt. He's small, but he's strong." The doctor didn't answer. The air didn't move. The world had already signed its verdict. Sarah, his wife, sat beside the bed, hands trembling, face carved into disbelief. For 2 days, she didn't cry. On the third, she did, and she never stopped. The house turned into a mausoleum. Ethan's drawings stayed taped to the fridge, his toy train still on the floor, his tiny shoes still by the door. Daniel couldn't touch them. Sarah couldn't look at them. They became the ghosts neither could live with nor throw away. One evening, 3 months after the funeral, Daniel came home to find a note on the kitchen table. "I can't breathe here anymore. I'm sorry." She was gone. After that, the silence became permanent. For a while, Daniel tried to return to teaching. Children were his language, his compass. But the first time he heard a boy laugh, the exact pitch of Ethan's laugh, something inside him broke in half. He excused himself from class, walked to the storage closet, and sobbed into a box of finger paints until his throat burned. He resigned the next morning. Then came the smaller jobs: warehouse night shifts, supermarket stocking, window cleaning. None lasted. People noticed the way he drifted through rooms, polite, efficient, unreachable. Finally, when he applied for janitorial work, he told the interviewer the truth. "I like cleaning because no one talks to you while you're doing it." The man nodded and handed him a mop. That was 4 years ago. Now, in the skyscraper of Halcyon Biotech, Daniel existed the way dust does. Invisible but necessary. The job paid enough to survive. It gave him quiet. It let him disappear. He lived in a small apartment outside the city. The walls were bare except for a single shelf, filled with homemade teddy bears, each sewn from scraps of Ethan's old clothes, each one slightly different. One with mismatched buttons, one with crooked ears, one stitched too tightly at the neck. He called them keepers. "Because they keep the world soft," he once whispered, as if explaining it to someone still there. At night, he'd pick one of them up and mend the seams again, not because they needed it, but because he did. He needed to believe broken things could be repaired if you just kept your hands steady. Sometimes he talked to Ethan, not in prayer, not in madness, just conversation. "Remember the park, the ducks, the slide that made you laugh?" Silence would answer, but a good silence. A silence that listened. He didn't tell anyone about these rituals. To the world, he was just another janitor with calloused hands and tired eyes. To himself, he was the custodian of something sacred, the memory of a boy who had once thought rockets could touch heaven. That evening, as Daniel finished mopping the elevator lobby, the lights flickered. Somewhere above, a door shut. The sound echoed differently, softer. He looked up and saw her. Catherine Monroe. He'd seen her photos, of course. The Iron Dove, the billionaire widow who turned tragedy into empire. She walked with that kind of practiced stillness that comes from living among people who are always watching. But here, in the fluorescent light of the 30th floor, she looked human, tired in a way that money couldn't disguise. Daniel straightened, unsure whether to speak. She stopped a few feet away, studying him like she was trying to understand a language she hadn't used in years. "Mr. Harper?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're the one who was with my daughter yesterday." He hesitated. She was crying. I didn't mean to." She raised a hand. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her voice was low, controlled, but frayed at the edges. "I just wanted to thank you." Daniel nodded, uneasy. "You don't have to." "I think I do." There was silence between them, the kind that tests two people to see who will fill it first. Catherine looked around the hallway. "How did you know what to do?" Daniel shook his head. "I didn't. I just stayed." Something shifted in her face, a flicker of pain, then understanding. "Most people can't stand silence," she said quietly. they try to fix it. I used to, Daniel replied. Then I realized sometimes silence is the only thing that doesn't lie. For a long time, Catherine said nothing. Then she whispered, "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Your husband?" Her eyes flicked toward him, startled. Then she nodded. "He was kind like that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Then your daughter must have it too." Catherine exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for months. In that instant, neither of them were CEO and janitor. They were just two parents standing in the wreckage of what love leaves behind. Later, as Daniel rode the bus home, the city lights blurred through the window, soft halos of gold and gray. He leaned his forehead against the glass, the vibration humming through his bones. He thought of Ethan, of the accident, of the unbearable gift of still being alive. And for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Not hope, exactly, but permission. Permission to still exist. Permission to help someone else breathe again. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw a child's small hands clutching a bear stitched from an old shirt, a fragment of the past finally doing something good. Tomorrow, he thought, he would bring another story for Lila. Maybe something about a lost rocket that finds its way home. Maybe, he realized, that rocket was him. The next afternoon, the sun bent its light against the glass of Halcyon Tower, painting long golden bars across the 30th floor. The air inside hummed with the rhythm of keyboards and distant conversations. Executives hurried between meetings, their reflections sliding over the marble like ghosts rehearsing importance. Daniel Harper walked among them, invisible as ever. But something inside him was different, quieter, steadier. The night before, he had sat at his kitchen table sewing a patch onto a tiny stuffed rabbit, but his mind hadn't been in Ohio this time. It had been here. In the moment Lila Monroe stopped crying. He hadn't planned to see her again. He told himself it was coincidence, an act of decency that didn't need repeating. But kindness, once awakened, has a will of its own. At 5:42 p.m., he was polishing the rail by the elevator when he heard it again. The faint rustle of a small hand brushing fabric. The soft exhale of someone trying not to be noticed. He turned. Lila was there. Same spot as before, behind the marble pillar. Hair neatly tied, dress pale blue like the horizon before rain. The teddy bear was clutched in her arms, one button eye glinting in the light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Daniel paused, set his rag aside, and walked over. The marble was cool beneath his boots. He sat down a few feet from her, careful to keep the same distance, the safe distance. For a while, neither of them said anything. The city's heartbeat pulsed through the windows, car horns, sirens, footsteps. Life, indifferent and unstoppable. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a small plastic bottle cap. Faded green, the kind you might toss away without a thought. He held it out in his palm. "You know what this is?" he asked softly. Lila glanced at it, then shook her head. "It's the cap from a water bottle I dropped years ago," he said. "When I picked it up, it looked useless, just plastic. But one day I started thinking, maybe it used to have a dream." She blinked, unsure whether to laugh. Daniel continued, voice low, storytelling voice, the one he hadn't used since Ethan. "Once upon a time, there was a little bottle cap who thought it was useless. It had protected the water for so long that when the bottle was empty, it thought it had no purpose. Everyone threw caps away, right? But then one day a child picked it up, painted a smile on it, and made it into a wheel for a toy car. The cap realized something. Even when you're not doing what you were made for, you can still do something good. Lila looked at the cap again. Her fingers twitched slightly, the bear pressed tighter to her chest. Daniel smiled faintly. Being sad doesn't mean you're broken, he said. Sometimes it just means your heart remembers too much. For a long moment, she didn't react. He almost regretted speaking. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, came a whisper. Are you sad? Daniel froze. The voice was small, fragile, like a sound that had to fight its way through years of silence. He turned slowly, eyes wide. Lila was looking at him. Not through him, not past him, but at him. Her lips trembled slightly, but there was courage there, the trembling kind that chooses connection over fear. Daniel swallowed. His voice came out rough. I used to be. Lila nodded, clutching her bear. Me too. Those two words broke something open inside the building. Not the glass, not the marble, but something deeper, older, human. Above them, on the 42nd floor, Catherine Monroe stood frozen before the live camera feed. Her hand covered her mouth. She watched her daughter, her silent, unreachable daughter, speak again for the first time in 3 months. No therapist had done it. No program, no expert, no amount of money. It had taken a man with a mop or a bottle cap and a broken heart. Catherine didn't realize she was crying until a tear hit the edge of her blouse. On the screen, Daniel smiled at Lila. Small, genuine. Would you like to keep it? He asked, holding out the cap. She nodded shyly, reached forward and took it. Her tiny fingers brushed his palm. He felt the warmth of life, fragile, miraculous, and for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. They sat there for another 10 minutes, saying nothing more. But silence now was no longer emptiness. It was peace. When the elevator doors opened across the hall, Daniel stood. He nodded to her. I should get back to work. Lila hugged the teddy bear, the cap resting in her lap. Okay, she whispered. He smiled. See you tomorrow, maybe. As he pushed his cart away, Lila watched him disappear down the corridor, the quiet man who didn't fix her, who didn't ask questions, who simply stayed. Upstairs, Catherine turned off the monitor and leaned back in her chair. The city stretched beyond the glass, alive, endless, indifferent. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the accident, the silence in her home would sound different tonight. Maybe softer, maybe forgiving. Down on the street, Daniel stepped out into the cooling air. The sun was sinking behind the skyline, scattering gold across the concrete. He breathed in deeply, the scent of rain and traffic and something that felt almost like redemption. He touched the small seam of thread on his sleeve, a leftover piece from Ethan's shirt, and whispered barely audible, "You'd have liked her, buddy." Then he smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need witnesses. For a man who had lost everything, he had just found the smallest reason to return tomorrow. And sometimes, that's how healing begins. Not with fireworks, not with sermons, but with 2 words shared in a hallway full of light. There are moments in life when power becomes irrelevant, when titles, walls of glass, and decades of discipline mean nothing. For Catherine Monroe, that moment arrived at exactly 5:47 p.m. She was still in her office. The city stretched beneath her like a grid of silent stars. The monitors glowed. Her schedule blinked reminders. Her assistant's voice whispered from the intercom about investors waiting in Zurich. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the grainy security feed of the 30th floor, where her daughter, the girl she couldn't reach for 92 days, had just spoken. 2 words. Me too. The sound didn't exist in the footage, yet Catherine could feel it, as if the world itself had sighed in relief. She reached forward, paused the video, and touched the screen. For the first time, the glass felt warm beneath her fingers. No therapy had done this, no doctorate, no behavioral specialist with their data charts and sterile patients, just a man in a gray uniform, a janitor, a stranger who carried grief as quietly as she did. Catherine stood up. "Miranda," she said through the speaker. Her assistant's voice crackled. "Yes, ma'am?" "Hold all my calls." "But the Zurich meeting—" "Hold everything." A beat of hesitation, then, "Understood." Catherine grabbed her coat. Her heels echoed sharply as she crossed the marble floor, but there was something unfamiliar in her stride. Not authority, not urgency, but vulnerability disguised as purpose. As the elevator descended, her reflection followed her in the mirrored walls, precise, immaculate, but tired in a way that no amount of power could disguise. When the doors slid open on the 30th floor, the air felt different, quieter, heavier, alive. Catherine stepped out, her heels tapping against the marble. A few employees turned, startled. No one had ever seen her down here. Daniel Harper was at the far end of the hall, rinsing a mop bucket. He looked up instinctively, then froze when he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine walked closer, the distance between them shrinking into something almost sacred, the space between two kinds of loss. "Mr. Harper," she said. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered with unease. "You helped my daughter." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I didn't help her. I just stayed." The words landed softly, but something inside her cracked open. Catherine had spent her entire career fixing things, systems, companies, crises. Yet here stood a man who had healed the one person she couldn't, not by solving, but by staying. She exhaled, a tremor in her voice. "No one else could reach her. I've spent 3 months trying. She hasn't spoken a single word." "I'm sorry," Daniel said gently. "Don't be. You've done what none of them could." He hesitated. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," she said, and something in her tone, stripped of power, of title, made him look up. "That's why it worked." For a while, silence stretched between them. Through the tall glass, the city glowed in its usual indifference. Then Catherine spoke again, voice quieter now. "I watched you, Mr. Harper. On the cameras. I saw the way you sat beside her. No words, no advice, just presence." Daniel's hands tightened around the mop handle. "Sometimes words make things worse." "Was that something you learned as a teacher?" she asked. His head lifted slightly, surprised. "You looked into my file." "Yes." "Then you know why I stopped." Catherine nodded slowly. "I know about Ethan." The name hit him like a slow punch. He didn't speak. Catherine continued softly. "I lost my husband 3 years ago. A plane crash. My daughter watched him board that morning. She doesn't remember much, but she remembers the color of his tie." Daniel swallowed hard. "Blue?" "Red," she said, faintly smiling. "He always wore red on flight days, said it brought luck." They both laughed, not out of humor, but survival. Two people bound by the same silence, now standing inside it together. "Do you ever stop missing them?" she asked after a while. "No," Daniel said simply. "But the shape of the missing changes." "How so?" "At first it's sharp. Cuts every time you breathe. Then one day it turns dull. Still there, but it lets you walk without bleeding. Catherine looked at him, at the lines on his face, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. I envy that kind of peace. It's not peace, he said. It's just love learning how to live in another room. Something about that sentence broke the last of her composure. Catherine turned away, blinking fast. You talk like a poet, Mr. Harper. He smiled faintly. No, ma'am. Just a janitor who ran out of people to talk to. The elevator doors opened again behind them. Lila stepped out, holding her teddy bear and the little green bottle cap in her small hands. When she saw her mother and Daniel together, she froze, uncertain. Catherine knelt, the CEO vanishing, the mother remaining. Sweetheart, she whispered. Lila hesitated, then walked forward. She didn't speak, but she didn't look afraid. She handed Daniel the bottle cap, like a secret shared. Catherine's throat tightened. She trusts you. Daniel knelt to meet the girl's eyes. You can keep it, Lila. It's yours now. The child smiled, a small, miraculous smile, and tucked the cap into her pocket. Then she turned and wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. For Catherine, it was like feeling sunlight for the first time in years. When she looked up again, Daniel had stepped back, giving them space. There was something almost reverent in the way he stood, as though he understood that not every miracle belongs to the one who makes it happen. That night, in the private stillness of her penthouse, Catherine poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city glittered far below, oblivious to the small revolution happening in her heart. She replayed the scene in her mind, Lila's smile, Daniel's calm voice, the quiet that didn't feel empty anymore. For the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like a woman fighting to control the world. She felt like someone remembering how to live in it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Miranda. Do you want me to prepare the psychologist for another session with Lila tomorrow? Catherine typed her reply carefully. No. Cancel all appointments. There's someone else I want her to see. She hesitated, then added, and tell Mr. Harper I'd like him to stay. That night, as Daniel locked up his cart, the security guard handed him a small envelope with Halcyon's seal. Inside was a note written in Catherine's neat handwriting. You helped my daughter when all the experts failed. If you're willing, I'd like to make this official. Not as an employee, but as someone I trust. He stared at the words for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. No one had said they trusted him since Ohio. He looked up through the glass atrium, past the lights, past the city, toward the stars he and Ethan used to count together. Maybe this is what staying feels like, he whispered. And for the first time in 4 years, Daniel Harper didn't feel invisible. For 3 weeks, peace existed inside Halcyon Tower like a fragile secret. Every evening, as the sun fell behind the skyline, Daniel Harper met Lila Monroe on the 30th floor. They didn't follow a schedule. They followed silence. Some days she spoke, some days she didn't. When she did, it was in fragments, the small, hesitant words of a child learning to believe in sound again. Catherine watched from afar, never interfering. She began to leave her office door open at 5:45 p.m., as if to let a new kind of air circulate through her life. And every night, she left work 5 minutes early, something she hadn't done in a decade. She would stop by the 30th floor, lean against the doorway, and watch them. Her daughter and the janitor. 2 people the world wouldn't understand, bound together by a tenderness that required no permission. But the world never leaves miracles alone for long. It started with a photograph. One evening, as Daniel was helping Lila hang her latest drawing on the bulletin board, A picture of three figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. Someone in the finance department passed by, phone in hand. They snapped a picture, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of boredom. The image made its way to the wrong chat, then to the right journalist. The next morning, Catherine's assistant stormed into her office, phone trembling. "Ma'am, you need to see this." The headline glared like a wound across every news site. Billionaire CEO hires janitor to heal her daughter, scandal or breakdown. Catherine read the words slowly. Beneath them was the photo. Daniel crouched beside Lila, handing her a stuffed bear. The angle made it look almost staged. Too intimate, too familiar. Comment sections had already erupted. Unprofessional, dangerous, desperate. One caption read, "What's next? Corporate therapy with mop buckets?" Another, crueler one, "Maybe grief makes fools of the powerful." Catherine exhaled through her nose. Every instinct of a CEO igniting at once. Crisis control, damage mitigation, brand protection. But then she saw the smaller picture below the headline, a blurred frame from the lobby security camera, showing Daniel holding Lila's hand as they walked toward the elevator. The caption read, "Is this appropriate?" And suddenly, the mother eclipsed the executive. She slammed the laptop shut. By noon, the board had called an emergency meeting. 12 people in tailored suits, gathered like surgeons around a wound they didn't understand. "Catherine, this is unsustainable," said Richard Glenn, CFO. "The optics are terrible. You've tied the company's image to an unverified employee." "He's verified," Catherine said evenly. "Then vet it again," snapped another. "This isn't compassion, it's risk." "He's done nothing wrong." "Not yet." The words hit the air like stones. Catherine leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp, voice cool. "You're suggesting what, exactly? That I fire a man for being kind?" "We're suggesting you think clearly," Richard said. "The markets react to perception. Investors want stability, not sentimentality." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. "Stability?" she said softly. "You mean the kind that lets a child cry in silence while her mother builds more glass floors?" The room went silent. Catherine stood. Meeting adjourned. Outside the conference room, reporters had gathered like vultures under chandeliers. Cameras flashed as Catherine emerged. Questions hurled through the air. "Is it true you replaced medical care with a janitor? Are you emotionally stable to lead Halcyon Biotech?" She didn't answer. Not yet. But that evening, when she stepped into the 30th floor hallway, Daniel was waiting for her. Shoulders tense, a paper in his hand. "They gave me this," he said. It was a suspension notice. She felt something in her chest twist. Who authorized this? HR. They said there were complaints. Anonymous. Something about inappropriate contact. Catherine's voice went low. "That's absurd." He nodded. "I told them they could check every camera, every report. I know," she interrupted. Behind them, the elevator doors opened. 2 police officers stepped out, followed by the head of corporate security. The air turned sharp. "Ma'am," one of the officers said carefully, "we received a report. We're required to investigate." Lila was there, standing by the glass wall, clutching her bear. Her face went white as chalk when she saw them. "Don't take him!" she screamed, voice breaking. "They'll take you like they took Daddy!" The entire floor froze. Daniel's throat tightened, eyes flicking to Catherine. He knelt beside the child. "It's okay, Lila. I'm not going anywhere." The officer stepped forward. "Sir, please stand." "No," Catherine said sharply, stepping between them. Her heels clicked once on the marble. a sound that silenced the room. "Without a court order," she said, her tone like tempered steel. "You're not taking him anywhere." The officer hesitated. She held his gaze. "Do you have one?" "No, ma'am." "Then you can leave." The security chief cleared his throat. "Mrs. Monroe?" "It's Ms. Monroe," she corrected. "And I just saved you from the most expensive lawsuit of your life." They left. Silence returned, trembling at the edges. Lila buried her face in Daniel's shoulder. Catherine exhaled slowly, the adrenaline shaking through her hands. "You shouldn't have to fight this," Daniel said quietly. "Neither should you," she replied. He looked at her then. Really looked. "You'll lose investors over this." "Maybe," she said. "But if I lose the one person who saved my daughter, I lose more than that." By midnight, the story had consumed every network. Some called it madness, others mercy. Hashtags trended, pundits debated. But inside Halcyon Tower, 3 people sat together in a quiet room: a CEO, a janitor, and a 7-year-old girl, all of them bruised by grief, all of them still standing. Catherine poured Daniel a cup of coffee. Her hand trembled slightly. "Tomorrow they'll demand an explanation," she said. "Then give them one," he answered. She looked at him. "What should I tell them?" "The truth," Daniel said. "That sometimes the world forgets what love looks like, and maybe it needs reminding." Catherine nodded slowly. "Will you stand beside me?" He smiled. Tired. Genuine. "I'm still here, aren't I?" For the first time that night, she laughed. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't CEO-like. It was real. Lila, half asleep on the couch, stirred and mumbled, "Don't go, Uncle Daniel." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I won't," he said softly. Catherine looked at them, the janitor and her daughter, and felt the shape of her life changing beneath her feet. Not collapsing, transforming. Outside, the city buzzed with judgment and noise. Inside, 3 hearts sat in fragile peace. And somewhere between them, for the first time, the world began to listen. The storm arrived just before midnight, a kind of darkness that swallowed sound. Rain drummed against the glass walls of Halcyon Tower, running down in trembling streaks, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of grief and light. Inside her penthouse, Catherine Monroe sat awake at the dining table, the glow of her phone illuminating her pale hands. The city below was asleep. But her mind refused to rest. The day had been a war: press conferences, shareholder calls, public scrutiny. Every outlet in the country had turned her life into spectacle. Billionaire CEO defies police for janitor. Corporate breakdown or human miracle? Halcyon Air's mysterious guardian. Catherine closed the screen, her eyes burning. She could fight boardrooms, she could silence investors, but she couldn't silence the world. The only thing that gave her strength was the sound of soft breathing from down the hall. Lila had finally fallen asleep after crying herself hoarse. The house felt fragile, like it was learning how to breathe again. Then the silence broke. The front door clicked. Catherine's body stiffened. She stood, heart pounding, and hurried down the hallway. Lila's room was empty. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the storm. Rain soaked the carpet, footprints trailing toward the fire escape. Her breath left her chest in a single strangled sound. "No! No! No!" She ran to the window and shouted into the rain, "Lila!" Only thunder answered. By the time she reached the security desk, the night guards were scrambling through camera feeds. "She's not in the building," one said, panic threading through his voice. "We checked every floor." Catherine's voice was cold, sharp, mechanical, the way it always was when the world fell apart. "Then she's somewhere connected to it. Start with the old Halcyon facility, the one near the river." The guard blinked. "Ma'am, that building's been closed for years." "She remembers it," Catherine snapped. "Her father took her there once." Her hand shook as she pulled out her phone. There was only one person she could call: Daniel. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with exhaustion. "Ms. Monroe?" "She's gone." The silence that followed was so absolute it roared. "Where?" "I think she went to the old building, the one near the river. She used to draw it. She said Daddy's still there." "I'm on my way." "Daniel." But the line had already gone dead. The rain hit like needles as Daniel drove through the empty streets, windshield wipers gasping against the downpour. Every streetlight seemed to blink slower than the last, as if the city itself were holding its breath. He reached the riverfront 20 minutes later. The old Halcyon facility loomed in the storm. Dark windows, broken signs, a relic of the empire's beginning. The gate was half open, creaking in the wind. "Lila!" he shouted, his voice torn by thunder. No answer. He ran through the main entrance, glass shattered underfoot, the air thick with dust and rain. His flashlight cut through the darkness, trembling slightly in his hand. Then he saw it, a faint beam of light, flickering in the distance. He followed. At the end of the hallway, in a small room lined with rusted equipment, he found her. Lila sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, a flashlight beside her and the teddy bear in her lap. She was humming, softly, tunelessly, staring at a dusty family photo on the wall, her father smiling in front of a Halcyon banner. When she heard footsteps, she turned, her eyes wide. "Uncle Daniel?" He knelt beside her, relief flooding through him like breath after drowning. "Hey, sweetheart. What are you doing here?" "I wanted to find Daddy," she said, voice trembling. "He worked here. He never came home." Daniel looked around. The walls, the broken glass, the emptiness. "Lila," he said softly, "you don't have to come here for that." "But I thought if I found the place, maybe he'd see me." He reached out and took her small hands. They were cold, soaked through. "You know something?" he said. "Your dad's not lost. He's right here." He placed her hand over her heart. "That's where he lives now. Every time you remember him, he wakes up for a little while." Lila's lip trembled. "I miss him." "I know," Daniel whispered. "I miss my boy, too." For a long time, they just sat there. Two people separated by generations but bound by the same ache. The rain hammered the roof above them. The flashlight flickered, then steadied, and then faint footsteps echoed down the hall. Catherine Monroe appeared in the doorway, soaked, gasping, rainwater running down her face like tears she no longer hid. She fell to her knees beside them. "Oh my God, Lila!" The child turned, clutching her mother's coat. "I wanted Daddy," she whispered. Catherine's composure shattered completely. She gathered her daughter into her arms, her sobs breaking against the sound of thunder. "I want him too," she said. For a moment they just held each other, mother and daughter, both broken in the same shape. Daniel stood quietly, stepping back, giving them space. The flashlight's glow painted his face in gold and shadow. When Lila looked up again, she reached a hand toward him. "But I found Uncle Daniel instead." The words hit Catherine like grace. Through all her fear, her pride, her loss, something in that sentence unclenched her heart. She reached out, placed a hand on Daniel's arm. Thank you, she whispered, her voice raw. For finding her. For finding us. He shook his head. You don't owe me thanks. I just stayed, she finished for him. He smiled faintly. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. The storm began to fade. The city's breath returned. They stood in silence, the three of them, in that forgotten building by the river. The mother who had tried to control the world, the janitor who had tried to disappear from it, and the child who had finally brought them both home. Outside, dawn was breaking. The rain thinned to mist. Catherine looked out the shattered window at the gray light rising over the skyline. I think, she said softly, we all survived something tonight. Daniel nodded. Maybe that's enough. He looked down at Lila, who was staring at her father's photo one last time. The teddy bear hung from her arm, the stitches soaked but holding. Sometimes the strongest things are made of weak materials: thread, tears, kindness. When they finally stepped outside, the air smelled of renewal. Catherine took Lila's hand, and with the other, she touched Daniel's shoulder. Come with us, she said. He hesitated. You sure? I'm done pretending I can save anyone alone. They walked into the dawn together, three silhouettes against a trembling horizon, proof that even broken people can still walk toward the light. And as the first sunlight broke through the clouds, the city began to breathe again. Morning came reluctantly. The storm had drained the city of its color, leaving everything gray and rinsed, like the aftermath of a confession. Halcyon Tower rose through the mist, sharp, cold, and strangely quiet. Catherine Monroe stood before the mirror in her office. Her hair was damp from the rain, her reflection pale but steady. She looked at herself as if facing a witness, not a friend. On the desk behind her lay a dozen printed headlines, their fonts screaming judgment. Halcyon Scandal, CEO losing control. Janitor Gate, Empire built on emotion. Mother or madwoman, Catherine Monroe speaks at 9. The board had begged her not to do it. Her PR team had drafted 1,000 statements she refused to read. Even Miranda had whispered, Ma'am, you don't owe anyone this. But she did. Because silence, she'd learned, doesn't heal. It festers. The press conference was set in Halcyon's main atrium, the same place where product launches and quarterly victories used to unfold under golden lights. Now, it was packed with journalists, cameras, and the dull hum of collective skepticism. Catherine stepped up to the podium, the sound of her heels echoing like the prelude to something irreversible. Behind her stood two people, Daniel Harper, in his gray uniform freshly pressed, and little Lila Monroe holding her bear, small fingers wrapped around its patched arm. The murmurs fell to silence. Catherine adjusted the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was low and clear. Not the voice of the Iron Widow, not the CEO who could bend markets. This was a mother's voice. Yes, she began. I hired a janitor. A ripple moved through the crowd. Flashes went off, pens poised. She didn't flinch. I did it because every expert, every counselor, every doctor I hired failed to do what this man did. Remind my daughter that love heals better than credentials. She paused, letting the sentence breathe. Her gaze swept the room. Cameras, critics, human beings pretending not to feel. For 3 months, my child lived in silence after losing her father. She was surrounded by brilliance, but not by presence. What Daniel Harper gave her wasn't therapy. It wasn't science. It was something this building had forgotten. Kindness without agenda. She gestured slightly toward Daniel, who looked down, uncomfortable but unashamed. I've built an empire on knowledge, she continued. But last night in the rain, I learned that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit. The journalists leaned forward. Catherine drew a breath, her next words trembling between defiance and grace. Starting today, Halcyon Biotech will fund a new foundation, Ethan's Light, in partnership with Mr. Harper. Daniel's head lifted in shock. It will provide free emotional care, art therapy, and support programs for children who've lost someone they love, Catherine went on. It will be open to every family who can't afford the kind of healing that money can't buy. She turned to Daniel. Her eyes softened. I named it after his son, Ethan Harper, who died at 5 years old. A boy who, I believe, would have grown up to be exactly the kind of man his father became. A wave of silence broke over the room. Not disbelief, not pity, but reverence. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat closed. He managed only, "Then, I suppose I can't say no." The reporters' cameras clicked like raindrops. Catherine smiled faintly. You shouldn't. Then, for the first time since her husband's death, she stepped back from the microphone and placed her hand over her daughter's. Lila leaned into her side, calm, eyes clear. A journalist called out, "Ms. Monroe, are you worried about the board's reaction?" Catherine met the question with quiet fire. "If they believe compassion is bad for business," she said, "then they've misunderstood what business is for." The room erupted. Flashes, applause, chaos. But none of it mattered. Because in the corner, Daniel was looking at the child who had changed everything. And in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen since Ohio. Light that stayed. Hours later, when the press had dispersed and the building was still, Catherine and Daniel stood together by the atrium windows. The rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through the clouds in thin, fragile ribbons. "You didn't have to name it after him," Daniel said quietly. "Yes, I did." "Why?" She turned to him. "Because you reminded me that grief doesn't end love. It purifies it. Your son lit the way for my daughter. That deserves a name." Daniel's jaw trembled, his eyes glistening. "You know, I used to think everything I'd lost was buried." She shook her head. "No, buried things grow, Mr. Harper. You just have to stay long enough to see what they become." They stood there for a while, in that sacred quiet that exists after storms, the kind of silence not made of absence, but of peace. Then Lila came running, her laughter like sunlight breaking through rain. She held up a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures under a yellow sky, each with a heart drawn in red. "Look," she said proudly. "I made our logo." Catherine laughed, a real, unguarded sound. "That's perfect, sweetheart." Daniel crouched to her level. "You gave us all hearts." Lila nodded. "Because everyone needs one." He smiled. "You're right." That night, as they locked the building, Catherine turned to Daniel. "Ethan's Light opens next month. We'll need someone to run the program." Daniel hesitated. "You mean—" "I mean I trust you," she said. "Not as a janitor. As someone who stayed." He looked out at the city, where streetlights blinked like small, stubborn stars. "Then I'll stay," he said softly. "As long as it takes." And somewhere, maybe in the part of the universe where love hides after death, a little boy named Ethan smiled. A year later, the 30th floor of Halcyon Tower no longer smelled of antiseptic and marble. It smelled of crayons, warm tea, and hope. The glass walls that once reflected ambition now reflected sunlight filtered through drawings taped by small hands, paper hearts, rockets, teddy bears, and crooked rainbows. The floor that once echoed with executive heels now carried the soft patter of sneakers and the laughter of children. On the frosted glass door, painted in careful blue letters, were the words, Ethan's Light. Free care and creative healing for children in grief, founded by Halcyon Biotech in memory of Ethan Harper. Below that, in smaller handwriting, Lila's handwriting, someone had added, Sometimes the smallest light guides the lost home. Daniel Harper stood at the window, looking out over the city that had once swallowed him whole. Now it glowed back, softened by the afternoon haze. Behind him, the room buzzed quietly, not with corporate energy, but with the humble noise of healing. At one table, a boy was painting a picture of his dog who had gone to the stars. At another, a girl with freckles was learning to sew a little rabbit from old fabric scraps, her tongue caught in concentration. And near the reading corner, a circle of children sat cross-legged around Daniel, who was telling a story in his slow, deliberate voice. Once there was a tiny lantern, he said, holding up a small wooden light he'd carved himself, that thought it wasn't bright enough to matter. But every night, a child who was scared of the dark lit it anyway. And that small light kept one child from being afraid. And that, he smiled, was enough to make it shine forever. When he finished, the children clapped, the small, uneven claps that sound more like faith than applause. Catherine Monroe stood quietly at the doorway, watching him. Her tailored suit was still impeccable, but the cold armor was gone. She had learned how to arrive without commanding a room. In her hand was a cup of coffee, one she now made herself instead of having brought by an assistant. "Still telling stories, Mr. Harper?" she said softly when the children dispersed. He turned, grinning a little. "Still learning how." "Lila tells me the kids call you Uncle Daniel." He shrugged. "Better than Mr. Mop, which is what I used to get." Catherine laughed, a sound that had become more common these days. She glanced around the room, her eyes catching on the mural along the far wall, painted by volunteers and children together. It showed 3 figures walking through rain toward a sunrise, one tall, one smaller, one tiny. She blinked hard. "I can't look at that too long," she said, her voice softening. "Me neither," Daniel admitted. Lila, now 8, came running in from the hallway, her ponytail bouncing. She wore a white volunteer badge that looked too big for her small chest. "Mom! Uncle Daniel! Guess what? The morning group finished their memory boxes." She opened one to show them. Inside were small treasures, photos, trinkets, letters never sent, pieces of lives once whole and now gently mended. "They wanted to keep something," she said proudly, "and give something away." Catherine smiled. "You're turning into quite the teacher." Lila beamed. "Uncle Daniel said the best teachers don't talk much. They just listen." Daniel chuckled. "I might have said that once or twice." She nodded solemnly. "I'm going to be one of those." And she ran off again, her laughter filling the hall. Catherine watched her go. "You gave me back my daughter," she said quietly. "I still don't know how to repay that." "You already did," Daniel said. "How?" He gestured around the room. "By letting this exist." Catherine's eyes followed the movement, the crayons, the fabrics, the tiny lanterns on the shelves. "You were right, you know," she said. "Love does heal better than credentials." He smiled. "You found that out yourself." She tilted her head. "You really think so?" He nodded. "You wouldn't be standing here if you hadn't." That evening, after the children went home and the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, Daniel sat alone by the window. He held a small photo. Ethan at 5 years old wearing a paper astronaut helmet. He whispered, "You see, buddy? We did it." Outside, the city was wrapped in gold and blue, a soft twilight that looked almost alive. He closed his eyes, feeling the hum of the building beneath him, a structure once made of glass and ambition, now filled with stories and laughter. Behind him, footsteps approached. Catherine. "We're hosting the 1-year celebration tomorrow," she said. "Press, donors, everyone. You'll speak, of course." He groaned. "You know I hate microphones." She smiled. "Then just tell them a story." He looked at her, saw the calm in her face, the light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "What story?" "The one you keep living," she said. "The one about the man who stayed." He chuckled. "I guess I don't know how to end it yet." "Maybe you're not supposed to." As Catherine left, Daniel turned back to the window. The sign outside glowed faintly in the rain-washed glass. Ethan's light. He whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Ethan. Even the smallest light can guide the lost home." And from somewhere deep inside that silence, not the silence of grief, but the silence of peace, he felt something answer. It wasn't a voice. It was the quiet certainty that love, when it stays, becomes light. The atrium of Halcyon Tower had never looked like this before. Once, it had been a temple to precision. White marble, glass ceilings, executives moving like chess pieces across polished floors. But today, it was filled with color, laughter, and the sound of children's voices echoing up to the 42nd floor like music finally returning to a cathedral that had forgotten its choir. A banner stretched across the entrance. Ethan's Light. 1 year of staying. There were no investors in black suits today. No graphs, no projections. Just families. Single parents holding the hands of children, volunteers arranging handmade lanterns, and people who had once walked into grief and now found a door out of it. At the center of the crowd, Daniel Harper stood by the podium, clutching his note cards like a man who'd rather fix a leaking faucet than speak into a microphone. His uniform had been replaced by a simple navy shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked nervous, but peaceful. Beside him stood Monroe, dignified and luminous, and little Lila, who wore a sunflower pinned to her white dress. The room quieted. Catherine stepped forward first, her voice calm, confident. 1 year ago, she began, this building was just another tower of glass and ambition. Today, it holds something far more powerful than profit. It holds the proof that staying matters. Applause rippled through the crowd. She turned toward Daniel. "And the man who taught me that is standing right here. Mr. Harper?" Daniel swallowed, stepped up to the podium. The microphone squeaked slightly. He smiled awkwardly. "Guess it's still learning too." Soft laughter, the kind that comes from affection. He set down his note cards. "I was supposed to read something prepared," he said. "But that's not really how life works, is it? Nothing we love ever goes according to plan." He looked at the crowd. Parents, children, strangers holding tissues, others holding hands. "A few years ago, I lost my son, Ethan. I thought I'd never speak his name without breaking again. But today, his name is everywhere. On the door, in the laughter, in every light you see. And that means something." He paused, eyes shining. "I used to believe healing meant fixing what was broken. Turns out, healing is quieter than that. It's sitting beside someone in the dark until they remember the light." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. He continued, his voice low, steady, carrying the kind of weight only truth can carry. Every child who comes through these doors reminds me of Ethan. Not because they're sad, but because they're brave enough to love again. And every parent here reminds me of Catherine, because she did the hardest thing anyone can do. She let someone else help. Catherine looked down, blinking back tears. Daniel smiled gently. We all carry shadows, but shadows mean there's still light somewhere close. And the miracle isn't that the pain disappears. It's that we learn to live beautifully in its company. He turned toward the children sitting in the front row. You are that miracle. Every single one of you. Then he looked up at the giant photograph hanging behind the stage, a candid picture taken months ago. Daniel kneeling beside Lila as she painted, Catherine watching from the doorway, the three of them framed in sunlight. He took a deep breath. Ethan, my boy, he whispered, voice breaking. We did it. The room rose to its feet. Applause thundered. Raw and human. Cameras clicked. People cried. Lila ran forward, tears shining in her bright eyes, and threw her arms around him. I love you, Uncle Daniel. He hugged her tight, pressing his cheek against her hair. I love you too, kiddo. Catherine joined them on stage. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She simply took Daniel's hand and Lila's hand, holding them together. The three stood in a circle of applause and light, each one a survivor of something that could have ruined them, but instead remade them. When the crowd began to disperse, the three of them slipped quietly out the side door, away from the flashbulbs and microphones. The late afternoon sun was spilling over the bay, gilding the water with amber fire. The air smelled of salt and rain and beginnings. They walked along the promenade in silence, Catherine, Daniel, and Lila, their shadows stretching long and even across the pavement. After a while, Catherine spoke. You know, she said softly, I used to think you were saving my daughter. Daniel smiled faintly. And now? Now I know, she said. You saved me too. He looked at her, eyes gentle. No, Catherine. We saved each other. She nodded, a single tear escaping, glinting in the sunlight. Lila skipped ahead, chasing a butterfly. Daniel watched her for a long time, a soft smile forming, part pride, part wonder. When they reached the end of the pier, Catherine turned back toward the city, the tower gleaming in the distance, its highest windows catching the last rays of the sun. It's strange, she murmured. For years, I built something I thought would make me immortal. But this, she gestured to the small flickering lanterns floating in the bay, part of the ceremony's end. This feels like what will really last. Daniel nodded. Light doesn't need to be loud to survive. He looked out at the horizon. Sometimes it just needs to stay. That night, after they said goodbye, Daniel returned to his small apartment. The air was cool, the city quiet. He sat at his table, the same one where he used to sew teddy bears in silence. Only now, a framed photo of Ethan rested beside a drawing of Lila's, the three of them holding hands under a golden sky. He lit a candle, one of the same lanterns the children had made that morning, and whispered, Your light didn't go out, Ethan. It just found new hands. He sat there for a long time, letting the candle's flame paint warmth across the room. Outside his window, the city shimmered, glass and steel softened by light that refused to die. And somewhere between heaven and the quiet corners of human kindness, a small boy's voice whispered through the stillness, You stayed, Dad. Daniel smiled through tears. Yes, buddy, he said softly. I stayed. The candle flickered once, steady and strong, and the city below, for a brief and holy second, felt entirely at peace. Grief doesn't end love, it purifies it. Miracles are not loud. They happen when someone simply stays.